Yeah, okay. So, all right, we have the recording here in progress, and hopefully others will be able to join us soon. And if not, we'll have this video available to the other students. So, Rocky, I will make sure that this gets uploaded to that drive before I head on with the rest of my day. After we're done, then you can pop it up on YouTube. So, okay, excuse me. Why don't we begin with a word of prayer? Let's pray. Father, how thankful we are for this day and for your blessings that you have given unto us in Jesus Christ. Father, we thank you for our daily bread and the common blessings that we receive of life, breath, food, family, and all of the other good things that you bestow upon us with the rain and the sun, which falls upon both the just and the unjust. But we especially thank you and praise you this morning for the redemption that we have in Christ, for that special grace that is found in him, which has delivered us from the wrath to come. And we pray that as we study and learn, that we would do so to your glory, and that you would equip us to be useful, profitable servants in your kingdom, for the sake of the glory of Jesus Christ, that we might bear testimony to the faith once for all delivered to the saints, and that in so doing we might defend that faith with competence and skill, that all of your people might be gathered into your church, that the saints might be gathered and perfected by the ministry of the word and sacraments in the ministry of the church and her mission. For we pray these things and ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Okay, so I want to just begin with a little bit of overview and remind us of where we have been and where we are going. And I think that we would do well to recap a little bit about Thomas Aquinas, because as we talk about Thomas Aquinas and we move now towards the time of the Reformation of apologetics through the insights of Cornelius Van Til particularly, I'd like to remind us of why it is that apologetics needed to be reformed. And I mean reformed not in that broad sense of reformed, like, needs to be corrected, but particularly having in view the idea of the reformed faith. Why is it that the approach to apologetics needed to become reformed in that sense, in the sense of being brought into conformity with the doctrine understood by the Reformation, particularly the Reformed branch of the Reformation? And that's an important thing for us to consider, because when the Reformation comes about, and particularly Calvin and the Reformed tradition grow and develop, we understand that there is a wider and broader gap in the theology of Rome and in the theology of the Reformers. And so because of that gap, what happens is the understanding of the way in which we defend the faith begins to change. And it has to change. I mean, it just has to change, right? Because the doctrine is changing. And if the doctrine is changing, the outlook that people have of the world, of God, and the relationship of God to the world is going to change. Inevitably, it has to change. And so, one of the areas, perhaps the foundational area where we see such change, is in the area of anthropology. So, I'm just going to jot that down there, anthropology in the chat, which is the doctrine of man, the study of the nature of man, particularly of man as image bearer of God. Okay. And I want to commend to you the section in Herman Bavinck's Reformed Dogmatics on the doctrine of the image. Actually, I want to commend to you all of Bavinck's Reformed Dogmatics, but particularly for our purposes here, Bavinck on the image of God is exceedingly important here, and is informing to a great extent what I'm about to say. So let's go back just to Thomas briefly here. And I want to talk about, I'm going to again jot these things in our chat. I want to talk about what Gerhardus Voss calls the deeper Catholic conception. And I'm going to, as Voss does, situate the deeper Catholic conception over against the deeper Protestant conception. So, for shorthand, we could do the DCC versus the DPC, the deeper Catholic conception over against the deeper Protestant conception. This is Voss in volume 2, I think it is, of his Reformed Dogmatics. Same title as as Bavinck, but different material, yet the same theology. Happy to report. But Voss is very insightful here when he talks about the deeper Protestant conception over against the deeper Catholic conception. And it has to do with anthropology. How do we understand man's makeup and his relationship to God as he has been created in the state of nature? Okay. We said this before, but I want to emphasize it again. The relationship between God and the creature is one where God and the creature share in a common being. It is in fact divine being, but it is a sharing in this concept and in this idea of being. God has more of it than we have, right? And when he creates, there is what I have called a cascading effect flowing out of God, as it were, into creation down towards non-being. So God is perfect being. He's that being above which nothing greater can be conceived. He is being in all of its fullness, completely and totally actualized. He is pure act, okay, the Actus Purus, which is the Latin expression for pure actuality, okay? God does not become something greater than what he already is. He is perfect being. He doesn't become anything other than what he is. That's different and in contrast to everything else in creation, right? So cascading from perfect being is this chain of being that descends downward towards non-being. And in this ladder of being, this chain of being, whatever you want to call it, you have a movement towards greater amounts of being to lesser amounts of being, okay? And humanity is situated somewhere in the middle there, okay? Angels are above because they have less material to them. They're just spiritual beings. We are both spiritual and bodily beings, and so sort of a lower rank in a metaphysical way. And so what happens is for Thomas Aquinas, man is created such that he has inherent within his very nature what is called concupiscence. And we talked about this last time, concupiscence. And concupiscence, if I could put it this way, is this natural drag upon humanity, okay, that pulls humans downward towards non-being and away from God, okay? So already for Thomas Aquinas, man in the natural state is already somewhat defective. Okay, he wouldn't say sinful, but he would. But the idea of concupiscence denotes the idea that there is something other than a state of covenantal relational bliss between God and man. For the Reform, that's the deeper Catholic conception. So, for the deeper Catholic conception, what is needed is what we have called before the donum superadditum, which is the superadded gift. It is God's grace, whereby now he pulls man back upward, the chain of being, right, against the powers of concupiscence, and forges within man a progressive approach to knowledge, righteousness, and holiness. Man becomes more and more knowledgeable of God, more and more righteous, more and more holy by the superadded gift. And so when he sins, when the fall occurs in Adam, what happens is Adam loses that supernatural gift. And so concupiscence completely takes over, right? And pulls man down towards non-being, which is why now the church is needed for its sacramental grace in order to pull man back up, right? So the superadded gift is gone. Instead of the superadded gift, there is sacramental grace that pulls man back upwards. The Reformed have a different conception of nature altogether. Okay, I mean, it's just radically different than what you have in Thomas. And this is going to necessitate a different view of apologetics. So let me explain then the deeper Protestant conception according to Voss. Okay, so according to Voss and according to the Reformed tradition, in general, there is in the state of nature when Adam is created in the image and the likeness of God in original knowledge, righteousness, and holiness. Okay, and it's those three things: original knowledge, righteousness, and holiness. I want to emphasize, particularly with regard to original knowledge. Okay, contrary to Rome, for the Reformed, man is created in an original relationship with God, in which man knows God in every way that God intended for man to know God. He knows God through nature. He knows God through God's special revelation. He knows God spiritually. So he knows God not just factually, but he knows God spiritually because he is in a covenantal relationship of bliss, right? It's not yet the perfected state of heaven. Put that off to the side for a moment, but just know it's not the perfected state, but it is a state of covenantal bliss in which there is religious fellowship, unstained, unfallen religious fellowship between God and man. And so when the fall occurs, what happens is man ends up losing those what the Reformed make a distinction between the broader and the narrower image of God. Okay, what happens is man at the point of the fall loses the narrower image of God. In other words, he loses knowledge, righteousness, and holiness. Okay, he loses his true spiritual knowledge of God. He loses his original righteousness, and he loses his original holiness. What remains is what is called the broader image of God, which are kind of like faculties that are given to man by God that persist, albeit totally corrupted. So reason, some of the higher faculties, love, and other attributes that are communicable with God, those things remain within man so that man still can reason, he can function, he can see, he's got ears to hear, but he can't hear the spiritual things. But anything that he can know, anything he can reason about is completely on the natural level. He retains that, but without original knowledge of God, without original righteousness and holiness, man cannot practice those natural faculties at any point in a godly way without grace, right? So in a state of fallenness, man's operation of reason, his operation of perception, his anything that remains within the broader, understood in terms of the broader image of God, is so totally corrupted without that original knowledge, holiness, and righteousness that he is unable to function properly, that is to say, with a Godward focus within the created realm. So what does all of this have to do then with apologetics? It has a lot to do with apologetics because we need to understand what happens in the relationship between the believer and the unbeliever relative to God after the fall. Okay, there is an absolute antithesis between the believer and the unbeliever after the fall. So grace, of course, comes, and grace is what makes a distinction between the believer and the unbeliever, the elect and the reprobate. And it's the believer now who has restored within him by grace that original knowledge, righteousness, and holiness, because in Jesus Christ. Okay, this is Colossians. Is it uh, Ephesians 4:24, Colossians 3:23? Rocky can correct me on those, where it talks about how the redemption we have in Christ is a redemption unto the renewal of original knowledge, holiness, and righteousness. So, so because we have that, let's say, knowledge, for example, restored within us, albeit now imperfect until the day of our glorification, we are now able to interpret the facts of creation in a way that is thinking God's thoughts after him. It is in a way in which now we can, using the lenses of Holy Scripture, as we look through the lenses of Holy Scripture at any fact, we can, by God's grace now, interpret those facts in a way that is in keeping with the interpretation of those facts by God. Okay. So remember, for Van Til, there's no, and we'll get to this in greater detail later, there are no brute facts. In other words, there's no fact out there that is not interpreted. And so he'll say that at minimum, if no human being is interpreting facts, God has already interpreted all facts, right? And so there are no brute facts, because all facts are interpreted facts, whether by God or by man. Man's responsibility is to think God's thoughts after him and to interpret those facts according to the way in which God has interpreted those facts, as that interpretation is revealed to us through revelation. So now that's going to be a very different conception than what we have with regard to Rome, right? For Rome, because there is no total corruption of the natural faculties of man, the fallen man, the sinful man, is going to be able to rightly, although imperfectly for Rome, make use of those human faculties and be able to come to a correct and true knowledge of God by nature, quite independent of grace. Okay. So Thomas Aquinas, in the opening sections of his Summa Theologia, makes it very, very clear that there is a knowledge of God that comes, a true knowledge of God that comes by way of a process of natural reasoning. Okay. It is a knowledge that is founded on natural philosophy, natural reason alone, apart from revelation. Okay. Whether general or special. And so when we talk about the reform of apologetics, we need to grapple with this system of Thomas Aquinas so that we can understand properly what are the abilities of the unbeliever. And that this is going to be, I'm just anticipating here, but this is going to be where Romans 1 comes into effect, right? The knowledge of God by the unbeliever is a knowledge that unbeliever corrupts at the alpha point, at the very moment in which that knowledge is gained, which is not through a process of natural reasoning alone. It can come, right? It can be through the use of reason's faculties, but it is also the type of knowledge that comes to the unbeliever instantaneously at the moment of the unbeliever's perception of reality. Okay. There is no need for a process of natural reasoning, although that certainly can happen among unbelievers, but there's no need for it in order for the unbeliever to know God. He can see God in the things that have been made. This is what Romans 1 is going to say. But immediately, because of the fall, and as the reformers say over against Rome, the total corruption of the entire nature, the moment the unbeliever perceives God through creation, he suppresses that truth in unrighteousness. And what he ends up doing is turning the true God then in his mind as an idol. he turns it into a false God. There's this instantaneous diversion in his mind and in his heart upon the perception of the knowledge of the true God to its complete and total corruption in an act of idolatry. Okay. So there is no point in time in which the unbeliever is able to know the true God truly. He is always knowing God in a corrupt fashion because he idolizes the creature rather than the creator. Okay. He worships the creature rather than the creator. That's his heart orientation. For Rome, it's completely different. For Rome, that image-bearing creature, even an unbeliever, is able through a process of natural reason come to the acquisition of the true God. Okay. And the acquisition of the true God for Thomas Aquinas is exampled by what the philosophers do, particularly he has in view the pagan philosophers, Aristotle, Plato, etc., that they are able to tap into the nature of God through a process of natural reason apart from revelation. Okay. The reformers are like, no. Okay. God, nothing can be known about God apart from the revelation of God. God must reveal himself, right, to the creature. And in so doing, in that revelation, man can know God after the fall by grace. Okay. And we'll get into all of this more in a moment later on as we get through. I just wanted to remind you of where we are on Thomas Aquinas and why Thomas Aquinas's theological system is connected to his approach to apologetics, which we described last time in terms of the 5 ways or the cosmological argument. So I'm just going to jot that down here real quick. 5 ways or the cosmological argument for the existence of God. And I went through that last time. If you need a refresher, I'll let you just go ahead and watch those videos again or look it up online. It's easy to Google 5 ways and you'll get a million websites that you can look at to describe Aquinas's cosmological argument for the existence of God. Okay, so my point is this. Thomas's 5 ways and the cosmological argument are connected to his approach to anthropology. Okay, you can't disconnect the two. Okay, apologetic method for Thomas is driven by his approach to metaphysics and to anthropology and how he understands the God-creature relationship. All right. You can't separate those two. The apologetic for Thomas is intimately connected to his theology. So you can imagine if our theology changes, right, as it does at the time of the Reformation, if our theology changes, then our apologetic method's going to have to change. Logically, you can't disconnect the two, which is what, by the way, I know. Okay, I'm doing a little bit of a sidebar here to anticipate where I'm going, but that's exactly what Protestant proponents of so-called classical apologetics are doing. Okay, not sure how the discussion is or what the discussion is like over there in the Philippines, but at least here in the United States, there's a long-standing debate over apologetics that goes back at least to like the 1960s. And because Van Til really sparked controversy when Van Til wrote on apologetics and basically called on the carpet Protestants who were using an approach to apologetics that was fundamentally and essentially Roman Catholic. And he called them on the carpet and they were not too pleased with it. And so, of course, there was a lot many who did not understand exactly what Van Til was trying to say. Some of that's on Van Til because his English was his second language, and sometimes his prose could be difficult to follow. But they still don't understand. And even as late into the 1980s, a well-known book co-authored between R.C. Sproul and Sproul's mentor, John Gershner, was a book on classical apologetics where they attack Van Til and his approach to apologetics. Love Sproul, not saying anything negative about Dr. Sproul and his good work that he's done over the years. Very thankful for him. Most of our churches here in America, Reformed churches, are filled with people who came to know the Reformed faith through Sproul. So I don't want to denigrate him in the least, but the book is just, it's terrible. it's not Dr. Sproul's best book. But it basically, what it's seeking to do is to disconnect theology from apologetics, right? Sproul is a Protestant. He wants nothing to do with Roman Catholic theology, and yet he adopts a Roman Catholic apologetic, okay, fundamentally, essentially. Now with some Protestant alterations along the way. But my point is this, and this is what you need to understand, take away. As goes the theology, so goes the apologetic method, okay? If you're going to be consistent. Thankfully, we have many Protestants, good, solid, Reformed Christians, who are inconsistent with their theology when they practice apologetics, okay? And they adopt an apologetic method while still retaining a Reformed theology. Thankfully, they keep the Reformed theology, but we wish they would be consistent and have a Reformed apologetic that would be in keeping with their Reformed theology. So that's why there's a need for the reformation of apologetics, okay? Setting all of that stuff up. Now, last time we talked a little bit about the Reformation. And during the time of the Reformation, of course, we have a reform in theology, not yet really a reform in apologetics. During the time of the Reformation, apologetic method is the last thing people are thinking about. They're thinking about, well, number one, how to save their heads from being chopped off by the Pope. So they're trying to survive, these Protestants, right? But they're also thinking about reforming the doctrine of the church and the church's practice itself, right? So they're not really getting into questions of apologetic method, other than, as we talked about last time, developing polemical theology. And polemics is nothing new. I mean, polemics is a medieval practice, that takes place within the scholastic methods, where debate forms over propositions, and you have pro and con going back and forth. And this is how Reformed theologians in the academy attempted to try to articulate doctrine and develop doctrine. That, of course, continues in many ways in the time of the Reformation. Nobody was more polemical than Martin Luther, although Calvin wasn't far behind. But Martin Luther knew how to wax polemical, oftentimes violating basic principles of good, cordial debate by ad hominem attacks. And if you don't know what ad hominem is a Latin expression for attacking the man, to the man. It means literally. And so basically, an ad hominem attack in the course of a debate would be like, I disagree with what you're saying because you're ugly. You attack the person, you call them ugly, and then you try to discredit their intellectual position on the basis of their looks. It's an ad hominem attack. It's not valid. Luther did this all the time, right? But it wasn't just Luther, of course. Catholic proponents and defenders of Catholicism also engaged in ad hominem attacks as well. So I don't want to hold that up as an apologetic method for us to use, of course. But my point is this, that as we talked about polemics as a form of apologetics, that, of course, is what's going on at the time of the Reformation, okay? You have a lot of polemics. The reformers are trying to develop theology and then defend their theology against the attacks, the counterattacks of Rome, okay? But particularly now, as we move into the modern period, the modern period is quite tumultuous. We talked last time a little bit about Descartes and what we have in Descartes as a turn to the Enlightenment, this idea of looking within for trying to find the source of knowledge and truth. And of course, Descartes' great proposition was, I think, therefore I am. And that was his maxim. Okay, that's his starting point. Okay, I think, therefore I am. There, Descartes believes he has founded the foundation of both epistemology, how we know, and metaphysics, what we are, our being. Okay, and so Descartes would ground the idea of knowledge within one's own self-existence and self-knowledge of one's own self-existence. And so from there, of course, he would deduce all other principles of epistemology and metaphysics, so forth and so on. This comes to fruition in many ways in the great German philosopher Immanuel Kant. Just jot that down there, Kant. And Immanuel Kant was, the Enlightenment philosopher of all Enlightenment philosophers. As I mentioned last time, he wrote a book called Religion Within the Bounds of Reason Alone. So I'll put the title in here in case it went too fast. Religion Within the Bounds of Reason Alone. So what, of course, Kant is doing there is trying to reconstruct Christianity in a way that is in keeping with Enlightenment principles, reason, right? And here we are, kind of ironic, but here we are yet once again in the Enlightenment, which is basically led by Protestants. I mean, Descartes was a Catholic, but Kant is a Protestant. But he's in some ways adopting the same method as Thomas Aquinas, right? This idea that we can come to a knowledge of divine things by reason alone. And of course, there's a world of difference between Kant and Thomas on everything else from that point on. But Kant, at least there, is seeking to find his starting point from reason alone. And what he does is he reconstructs the entire system of Christianity in a way that is in keeping with Enlightenment principles, which basically means gutted of its miracles, its supernatural elements, the stuff that transcends reason that you can't prove or establish on the basis of reason alone. And then he jettisons all of that, stuff like the incarnation, is going to get repackaged in a way that's in keeping with rationality according to Enlightenment principles. You get rid of the miracles of Jesus, like the resurrection, regeneration of the heart by the Holy Spirit, right? All those things that are supernatural, basically, that are beyond reason. Kant's wanting to repackage those and reform. I don't want to say reform them because I don't want to confuse you, but from Kant's perspective, it's a repackaging, a reconstruction of Christianity in a way that is in keeping with Enlightenment principles. So Immanuel Kant then very much sets things up for, I always got to concentrate, Schleiermacher, on how to spell it, but the German theologian, Friedrich Schleiermacher. Schleiermacher is known as the father of Protestant liberalism or theological liberalism. And Schleiermacher is, and Rocky, by the way, if you have handy, I don't know your internet access there, but if you have handy being able to find the dates, the birth and death dates of Schleiermacher, and can drop those in the notes, that'd be great. So Schleiermacher, the father of theological liberalism, is really concerned about what he sees in Europe, and Germany in particular at the time. Because of the Enlightenment and this sort of turn towards rationality, Christianity, he sees, is suffering. The churches are emptying out. People are promoting this high high society of intellectual contemplation. Anybody who is anybody in society is enlightened, right? Everybody wants to be enlightened. Everybody wants to be modern, and forsake and jettison those old ways, that old dogma that has constrained Western civilization for years and decades and centuries. The real and right way for us to move forward as a society is through rationality. Thank you, Rocky. Appreciate that. And so what you have then with Schleiermacher is he has these addresses that he gave, and it's let's see if I could find it real quick, just to make sure I get the right okay, so yeah, Schleiermacher had these speeches, these addresses that he gave, and eventually formed into a book called On Religion: Speeches to Its Cultured Despisers. There, you got to understand, for Schleiermacher, in those addresses, okay, what he's trying to do is to try to convince people who have given up on religion altogether, okay, who have despised religion, okay, for high culture, high society, enlightenment, right, and modernization. For all those people who have despised religion, Schleiermacher is wanting to offer an apologetic for the Christian faith. Now, this is where we need to understand that not all apologetics is good apologetics, right? There are things that Thomas Aquinas taught us in the cosmological argument that if we repackage that under Reformed theology somehow, and then, roll it out methodologically in a way that is in keeping with Reformed theology, there's good stuff there, right? We understand that God really is the creator of all things. Okay. He really is an unmoved mover in that sense. If we can understand that in the context of Reformed theology. Schleiermacher, however, comes along and offers an apologetic for Christianity, which is an apologetic, a defense for a faith that is actually contrary to true Christianity in any sense of the term. So when he gives his speeches to the cultured despisers, what he is wanting to do is to give an apologetic, a defense for Christianity that makes Christianity palatable, acceptable, if you will, to a modern enlightened people. So kind of like with Kant, when Kant in his book, as he's trying to reform, repackage Christianity in a way that is in keeping with reason, Schleiermacher does a very similar thing. Schleiermacher is wanting to provide a rationale, a defense of Christianity, to say, no, it is reasonable, it is rational, and it is in keeping with Enlightenment principles. But what happens along the way when Schleiermacher does that is he twists and he perverts Christianity to such an extent that it becomes one with the Enlightenment and with modernity or modernism, rather than what it has always been known to be from the very beginning. He wants to try to turn religion, or turn Christianity, into a wholly naturalistic religion. Okay, so the difference between naturalism and supernaturalism is really the difference between false religion and biblical Christianity, right? Supernaturalism realizes that God is above nature. He is the creator of nature. And he has, as the creator of nature, the right and the ability to control nature from the outside, right? God has the ability to come to nature and to providentially bring it everything that comes to pass to come to pass. He is not restricted by the laws of nature. God can perform what we call miracles without any violation of the laws of nature, because God is the Lord of nature, right? He doesn't violate laws when he interacts with nature. He is the lawgiver over nature, right? God is the supernatural one, the one above nature, who intervenes with nature to bring about everything that his holy will desires to bring about. And so really, when we talk about miracles, like the miracles of Jesus or the resurrection, for example, we don't need to be sort of like embarrassed by that, like, because one thing's for sure, we ought not to be surprised when God raises the dead, as if God were somehow unable to do it, right? God is powerful, mighty over all of creation, such that the resurrection, far from it being a surprise, ought to be expected by us, right? Especially because God reveals he's going to do it in the Old Testament. Anyway, that's another lecture altogether. My point is this: Schleiermacher wants to try to make Christianity wholly in keeping with naturalistic principles, okay? And so when he does so, he thinks he's defending the faith. So, I mean, his intentions in and of themselves are good. Like, he wants to defend Christianity, and he wants to make, if I could use a political expression from America, Schleiermacher wants to make Christianity great again. I mean, because it's in the midst of a decline. Europe and Christendom are crumbling before his eyes. And quite frankly, like, Schleiermacher wants to keep Christendom. I mean, that's what he wants. He wants Christendom to continue and not to collapse. And he's desperate in many ways. And so his intention is to try to offer an apologetic for Christianity, but rather than defending the faith once for all delivered to the saints, he ends up creating a new religion altogether, namely liberalism. And one of the things we'll talk about a little bit later, particularly when we get to Machen, is the fact that what Schleiermacher offers is a different religion from Christianity altogether. It's not a different version of Christianity. It's just a different religion at its outset. From the alpha point of its system of thinking, Schleiermacher offers a contrary, different, opposed religion from Christianity altogether. It is not truly, from the perspective of God, a defense of Christianity. It is a perversion of Christianity. It is not just a form of Christianity that somehow becomes palatable to an enlightened people, but it actually becomes a heretical set of doctrine altogether. It's anti-Christian, okay, at its very core. And so, yeah, right, Rocky, that's right. He wants to make Christianity politically correct. He wants to make Christianity. Okay, let me put it to you this way. Schleiermacher really feels like he needs to help God out, right? It's like, look, Lord, your religion that you revealed in the Bible is not keeping the churches full. People see it as ridiculous. They mock it. So let me help you out, God, and let me come up with a better system of religion that will be more palatable to the people here in enlightened Europe, right? And so what Schleiermacher does, let me pull it all together. What Schleiermacher does is the carnal sin of all bad apologetics throughout the history of the church. Remember when we opened up and we were talking about the early church and the early apologetics methods that were going on? What happened, right? There's a spectrum we talked about between those who were maintaining pure Christianity and defending pure Christianity, and then those who syncretized with pagan philosophy and watered down true Christianity and ended up promoting more Greek pagan philosophical ways of thinking. Origen being the classic example, right, of a theologian, a Christian theologian who was brilliant, very influential in the early church, but whose theology ended up becoming compromised on the basis of Greek philosophy. Okay, so there, you have a spectrum between those who maintain pure Christianity and those who completely pervert it altogether for the sake of the trends of the day, Greek philosophical thought. The same exact problem is there in Schleiermacher, right? And then what happens in modern approaches to apologetics, whether we go out and talk about von Harnack, if we go talk about Schweitzer, the New Testament theologian and physician and missionary, whoever you're talking about within the modern period who would identify as modernist, it's the same problem. The school of Schleiermacher is the same problem you have in the early church. Rather than, let's say, syncretizing between Christianity and Plato, in the modern period, you have a synchronization between, let's say, Christianity and Immanuel Kant. Okay, it's Immanuel Kant presented a thoroughgoing, unbelieving, anti-Christian system of philosophy. Okay, at its core. I can't unpack that, prove that to you here in this class. That's another class altogether, but I'm just asserting it for our purposes. And I would encourage you to do your own research and look into that yourself. But that's basically what happens. Schleiermacher and those of his school are syncretizing Christianity with unbelieving philosophy of their day and coming up with a perverted form of religion. Okay? So what Origen does in the early church, in method, it's indistinguishable and identical with the method that we find with Schleiermacher in the modern period. Okay, this is why we need leading up beyond this time, why there is a need for reformation in apologetics. Okay, is because the apologetic method that we're finding developing, whether in Schleiermacher or in Origen, or to a certain extent, Thomas Aquinas, who is syncretizing Aristotle and Christianity. Whoever we're talking about within the history of Christian apologetics, there is a desperate need for it to become reformed. That is to say, for it to come into conformity with reformed doctrine, reformed theology. So that's what we're finding as we go along within the modern period. I've been going on here for almost an hour. So let me just take a quick stop here for a second and see if you have any questions or comments. Any comments or questions? While you think about that, I'm just gonna turn off my camera for about 35 seconds while I go get myself a drink, okay? I need something other than coffee to drink, otherwise I get really dry mouth. So I'll be right back. 35 seconds. Okay, I'm back. Okay, any questions, comments? Of course, the Reformed Vantillian apologetics could be seen sporadically spread throughout the Reformers' writings. Yes, yeah, I agree. Yeah, definitely. Within the Reformers, the theological system is being laid forth, right? So that by the time we get to Van Til is able to pick up all of that theological foundation laid by the Reformers and the Reformed leading up to the 20th century, and be able to say, hey, why don't we get our method of apologetic into conformity with all the doctrine that we love so much? So very good. All right. Yeah. So Van Til does not drop out of the sky. I mean, he is not giving us something de novo. He is giving us the old Reformed theology and proposing a way that we can defend the faith with the faith. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Okay. So let's talk about just rounding off the modern period. I mean, so much more needs to be said. The modern period is made up of an incredible period of time within Protestantism, particularly in Europe, an incredible period of time of massive literary and intellectual output. So, of course, Germany tends to be the epicenter of all of this. So here's a funny thing. See if this translates. I think it was either there was an American evangelist, and I'm trying to I think it was Billy Sunday. It might have been Charles Finney who said this. I'm going to give you a quote in a second. Now, Billy Sunday and Charles Finney were preachers during what is called the Second Great Awakening here in America. This won't be on the test. This is extra bonus stuff. So Finney and Billy Sunday, I forget again which one was the one that said it. They were sort of revivalistic preachers. They were not Reformed. So I'm not promoting them as heroes or anything, but well-known celebrity preachers. And they, one of them said something along these lines: if you could take hell and turn it upside down and read what was on the bottom of it, it would say "Made in Germany." That's a way. It's a very perceptive. It's not nice, and today not culturally sensitive, right? Politically incorrect to say something like that. But part of the reason why they said that is because of all of the liberal theology that was coming out of Germany. And of course, American evangelicals did not appreciate German liberal theology. So they still don't. Rightly so. And if you do appreciate German liberal theology, you're no longer an American evangelical. But anyway, that being said, Germany in the modern period produces a litany of theological resources that are promoting and advancing and developing the insights of Schleiermacher. Schleiermacher is the father, and then from him you've got, every liberal theologian since. What they all have in common is apologetics. They're trying to provide a rational enlightenment alternative to the old dogma. Okay. And that's and they're all just trying to save civilization. As a sidebar, they didn't realize that they were actually destroying the very Christianity that they were trying to save, right? But it is an act of man's arrogance and pride to think that he needs to save Christianity by offering something other than Christianity itself, right? The way that you save Christianity is by saying, I have no power to save it. right? Only God can save it. God has the plan. It's his kingdom. And all I need to do is to point to him. All I need to do is to proclaim his word, right? And God takes care of all the rest. Trusting that what sounds to modern ears as old wives' tales and mythology is really the truth that brings new life to sinners and builds Christ's church. If you learn nothing else in this class, learn this. The best way to defend the faith and to promote the Christian faith and to build the church is with the Christian faith itself. Okay? We don't need to be embarrassed by, we don't need, if defense means that we need to help Christianity out and to try to make Christianity great again, then we've lost from the very beginning, right? Christianity is great because God is great. Christ is great. And all we need to do is to make Christ known. And I think that when we approach apologetics in a faithful way, what we're wanting to do is to use the faith once for all that was delivered to the saints to defend the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. We don't leave our faith behind and go on to reason or go on to the particular cultural inclinations or desires of the day and then recast it, spin Christianity anew, and try to make it in conformity with the principles of the world. That's how worldliness creeps into the church. That's how worldliness creeps into our theology, right? Is by trying to placate the world by recasting Christianity in a way that makes them happy, right? No, this is where Christian boldness comes in. We have to proclaim the faith, even if it's not popular, even if we're persecuted for it. So, Billy Sunday, very good. If you turn hell upside down, you find "Made in Germany" stamped on it. That's right, Billy Sunday. By the way, Billy Sunday was I believe he was a lay preacher. I don't even think he was a minister. He was a baseball player. And he was a very dynamic personality. There's books and articles out there online you can read about Billy Sunday. It's entertaining. But he would bring his love of sports into his crusades. He was sort of like Billy Graham. I think all y'all have heard of Billy Graham, but Billy Graham kind of continued in that tradition of setting up these huge platforms where you would have a revival service, or you would have some sort of a campaign, and have a really dynamic presentation. And that was Billy Sunday. He was entertaining, he was dramatic, and he would bring some of his experience as a baseball player into the platform as he would preach and all of that stuff. So anyway, that's Billy Sunday, not to be confused with Billy Graham, but although the two of them kind of share a lot in common. So very good. Thanks for that, Rocky. That's helpful. Okay. Let's see, where were we? Okay, we're talking about modern approaches to apologetics. Now, this ends in the 20th century. You can almost perfectly mark the end of modernism at the time of World War I, approximately 1914 to 1919. Okay, so World War I really marks the time in which modernism begins to crumble, both in the area of philosophy and in the area of theology. The figure who puts the nail in the coffin of modern theology in the tradition of Schleiermacher is Karl Barth. And I should know his dates because he's the one I wrote my dissertation on, but I may get the dates wrong anyway. I think it's 1889 to 1968. But Rocky, feel free to correct the birth date. I'm positive on the death date, but I'm a little unsure about the birth date. But Karl Barth it was a Swiss theologian, although he was a German speaker, native German speaker from Basel, which is a German-speaking canton in Switzerland. And he did a lot of his he did all of his training, as far as I know, in Germany, and did a lot of his teaching in Germany, though he ended his teaching in Basel. So he's a Swiss theologian, and his contribution is that he reacts against liberal apologetics. Karl Barth calls for the death of apologetics. Now, the reason why he says that is complex. Put simply, he sees that Schleiermacher and the liberal tradition are trying to, what they do is compromise Christianity in order to appease the culture. He sees that. He sees what really disturbs Karl Barth is the fact that German culture, society, and politics are so wrapped up with Christianity, a liberal form of Christianity particularly, that the German people have become completely and totally unquestionable towards the German government. Okay, let me explain. When Karl Barth's father was a minister as well, and a theologian, and a fairly conservative one at that, did not buy into hook, line, and sinker the full liberal program. He was what they called a mediating theologian. That's neither here nor there. But when Barth went off to university and then did his theological training, he became a liberal. He was a committed liberal. His first pastorate was in a canton called, or a village, I think it is, Seifenville. It's pronounced Seifenville, but it's spelt Seifenwil. A village church. He was actually before that pastorate, he was an associate pastor in another church, I think in Geneva, where he did like youth work or something. He was basically a youth group leader in Geneva. And then his first full pastorate, full-time solo pastorate, was in Seifenville. It's interesting in Seifenville, and I got to be careful because I've studied Barth so much that I could just keep going on talking about too much that's not really relevant here. But it was there in Seifenville where he became a socialist. He was a liberal theologian, but then became politically a socialist, and was there concerned about the factory workers, and he supported the workers' union. He preached all the time from the pulpit about justice in society and justice for workers, preaching against the greed of corporate and company owners who mistreat and underpay their employees, and so forth and so on. Became a full-blown socialist. And so he was sort of in that, even though he was in Switzerland, not Germany at the time, pastoring, he very much became infatuated with everything in Germany, the German theology, liberal theology, socialism that was running rampant in Germany, so forth and so on. All of this comes to an abrupt halt at the outbreak of World War I around 1914. And in 1914, as war breaks out, you have Wilhelm II, who decides he's going to invade Belgium. And he does so in the most violent way. I mean, widespread bloodshed, not just of soldiers, but of innocents as well, innocent people, civilians. It was a bloodbath, and it oftentimes referred to as the rape of Belgium. And the rape of Belgium it came under extreme criticism by the other nations within the media, so forth and so on, in defense of the war effort of the Kaiser, Kaiser Wilhelm, was a document, a statement that was composed and signed by a number of German intellectuals, including a number of Barth's professors that he learned under. And this got Barth thinking, what is it about liberal theology that would allow for support of the Kaiser's bloodshed? So Barth was against the war, and he was against the efforts of the Kaiser, and he was certainly abhorred by the rape of Belgium and the bloodshed. So Barth was very much against this. And when he found out that his liberal professors were for it, he began to scratch his head and think, there must be something wrong with liberal theology that allows for my professors to sign off on just such a terrible evil. So Barth begins to think it all through, and he tries to figure out what is it about liberal theology that allows for such promotion of evil. And he basically concludes this, and he's not altogether wrong. He basically concludes this: what the liberal theologians have done is basically pull God down from as being a transcendent being, pull God down and make him so imminently involved in creation that basically indiscernible are the purposes of God and the purposes of society, particularly German society. And this confusion, this identification of God with the culture, God with society, God with the political motivations of the German nation, this confusion leads Barth to say, no. What we need to do is to allow God to be God, right? And again, a spin off the political statement I mentioned earlier, we gotta make God great again, which means for Barth to put God back up into this transcendent realm where he's distinct from and in no ways identified with what is happening culturally. And that's exactly what Schleiermacher did, right? Schleiermacher wanted to try to make God in keeping with modern Enlightenment culture and society, right? And Barth is saying, no, we got to make God great again. We got to make him transcendent again. And so what he does is he writes and he publishes a commentary in the book of Romans. Sometimes you'll see it in the literature simply referred to as the Romer brief, so the letter to the Romans, literally in German. And that's his commentary on Romans. And it's an odd commentary. It's a very weird commentary. There are two versions of it. The first one was the one that as is often said about it, landed upon the playground of the theologians like a bombshell. So his first version of the Romer brief, the commentary, is called a bombshell upon the playground of the theologians. I mean, it just explodes and gets a lot of people upset. One of the things that I like about Karl Barth, not his theology, one of the things I like about Karl Barth, though, is that he's not afraid to upset people. He's willing to put it on the line and confront and to be confrontational and provocative in his cause. Now, ultimately, his cause wasn't good. But I appreciate the fact that he was willing to make enemies over what he thought was the truth. That's a commendable trait. Too bad Barth didn't have the truth. But anyway, be that as it may, he is right, though, to analyze the problem of liberalism and liberal approaches to apologetics so as to identify God and culture, okay, to make God palatable to culture. And what he wants to do is to offer a corrective to that, let God be God. The first version of the Romans commentary explodes. It's an odd commentary. It's not really a commentary on Romans as much as it is a commentary on liberalism. And what he's offering in the first version is it's really not better than liberalism. It's basically existentialism. So he's going through a phase when he writes his first commentary to the Romans, where he's infatuated with Kierkegaard, who is well known as the Danish existentialist. And he's offering kind of an existentialist version of Christianity in place of the Schleiermachian version of Christianity. And so when he does so, again, that sparks a movement. So he and a number of other theologians in Germany joined together to form this cause that sometimes is dubbed neo-orthodoxy, the new orthodoxy, which is a bit of a misnomer on a number of levels, not the least of which is it's not orthodox at all, what is actually promoted. But Barth is trying to, and his cohorts are trying to spark a movement that is opposed to liberalism, but putting in its place something quite different than liberalism, but also something quite different than Christianity, Orthodox Christianity. It's more of an existentialist form. Of course, Barth's theology would not remain existentialist. It would develop over time. We won't get into the entire development of Barth's theology, but simply to say, for our purposes here, he wants to do away with apologetics altogether. He's critical of Schleiermacher's approach to apologetics, and he is also critical of Thomas Aquinas's approach to apologetics. He basically says, okay, when talking about Thomas Aquinas, Karl Barth, remember what we talked about before, the chain of being. There's a Latin expression to describe the chain of being, and it's called the analogia entis, the analogy of being, which is basically the same idea that God and man share being, right? And there's the hierarchy of it, a ladder, if you will, steps, whatever you want, cascading down from God to non-being. That entire scheme, which fuels Thomas Aquinas' approach to apologetics in the cosmological argument, Barth calls that the Antichrist. I mean, so you can imagine just how unpopular he was with Roman Catholics, at least at the beginning. He kind of toned things down at the end of his life. But at the beginning, in his earlier career, he called the analogia entis doctrine of the Antichrist. And that's got, of course, huge European implications, because Protestants during the time of the Reformation and beyond in Europe regarded the Pope as the Antichrist, right? That was all part of the historicist eschatology that was there. Anyway, we won't get into that. But for Protestants, the Pope was regarded as the Antichrist. And when Karl Barth calls the analogia entis, the doctrine of the Antichrist, he's taken an attack on Thomas Aquinas' approach to apologetics. Now, once again, Barth is not wrong in attacking Thomas Aquinas' doctrine and apologetic. He's not wrong in attacking Schleiermacher and his approach to apologetics, Barth is very perceptive to see the compromise that is there in both Schleiermacher and Thomas Aquinas. Okay, but what he offers in its place is really something altogether unacceptable. Now, we won't get into Barth's theology here, but he is promoting, as much as he speaks against apologetics and against Schleiermacher's approach of syncretizing modernism and Christianity, what Barth really offers instead is a new syncretization between Christianity and modernism. But it's a new kind of modernism. It's the modernism that is characteristic by 20th century intellectual thought, much more in the line with existential philosophy, so forth and so on. Much more so in conjunction with that than with the older modernism, but still yet modernism. So let me just, if you're at all interested in philosophy, this may make sense. Existentialism, while from one perspective is a radical break from the old Enlightenment modernism, in so much as existentialism oftentimes gets characterized as postmodernism, right? But really, existentialism or postmodernism is just a new form of the old modernism, just sort of updated and recast. It's certainly not a move towards biblical truth in Christianity. So likewise, Karl Barth's theology, while from our external perspectives, it looks like a radical break from Schleiermacher and Enlightenment modernism, but it's not. It's a continuation of the same thing, just repackaged in a very different way. That makes it look like it's opposed to modernism, but actually is just a new form of modernism. So what Barth offers, while certainly perceptive in his criticisms of Schleiermacher and liberalism and Thomas Aquinas and Catholicism, is really just a new form of modernism. It's not anything better. It's a different religion altogether from Christianity. But our point here for highlighting this is the way in which the approach to apologetics begins to, goes on to develop into the modern period, moving from Schleiermacher to Barth. So Schleiermacher is all about apologetics by trying to make Christianity palatable to modern Enlightenment ears, to Karl Barth and more existentialist theology, which is not concerned with apologetics at all. In fact, it's not. It's like a giving up on reason altogether. That brings us then to the point where I want to talk about apologetics now in the modern period in the conservative camp. Okay, and here, in order to look at apologetics in the conservative camp, we really do need to move to America. Because of America's geographical distance from Europe, the influence of German Enlightenment liberalism ends up being somewhat delayed in America than it is in Europe, right? It's running, like wildfire in Europe, but in America, not everybody's reading German, so they're not really familiar with, with what Kant is saying, what Hegel is saying, so forth and so on. Or Schleiermacher for that matter. And so there's a delay in sort of the influence of modernism into America, although it is happening. But there are defenders of the faith that are desirous of defending the faith once for all delivered to the saints, who are committed to Christian orthodoxy. And that mostly is found within the context of Old Princeton Seminary. So we say Old Princeton in contrast to New Princeton. I'll explain that some other time. But we want to, in our next session, God willing, next week, what we want to do is talk about how did apologetics get practiced by conservative, traditional, Orthodox Reformed theologians. Particularly, our focus here will be in America and in particular at Princeton. So we'll take that up next time, God willing, and we'll begin to develop some of the apologetic method that is used by people like Charles Hodge, B.B. Warfield, J. Gresham Machen, and then eventually into Cornelius Van Til. Okay, so we'll do that next time, and thank you all for your attention. If there are any questions, feel free to ask now, or go ahead and email me at, I'll just put in my email address again. I'm always happy to take emails, or you can message me on Messenger. I'm happy to discuss and chat more. So, all right. Any questions comments before we go? All right. Well, thank you again for your attention. And why don't we go ahead and close our time with prayer? Let's pray. Father, thank you for this time and the things that we've discussed. I thank you for these brothers who are here learning with me, and as we study together, and we pray that you would bless them in their studies, bless their families, bless their churches, and bless their future work and labor in the kingdom. Do be with them as they think through these things, that they might be better equipped to defend that faith once for all delivered to the saints. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Dr. Cassidy.
Happy to do it. Good to see you, brothers, and God bless you all. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.